For my final project, I wanted to explore LGBTQ representation in the visual entertainment media industry of the United States. The goals of this presentation is to explore the foundations of queer representation, highlight statistics of who's visible on screen versus who's actually in the queer community, identify the importance of intersectionality, discuss common queer tropes and stereotypes, and expand on the impact that this visibility has on the LGBTQ community. I argue that being able to have someone to look up to in entertainment media that holds an assumed role of influence is empowering, and that there are many detrimental and invalidating impacts of not being able to have this representation and visibility. I would like to start with this quote from Jacob Took that queer representation should be human representation. Until the queer characters in media are humanized, the representation will never be truly reflective of the queer community. End quote. Some concepts that I will be discussing throughout this presentation include gender, which refers to a bodily performance of normativity, often seen as a cultural and social organization of bodies and different types of people. Gender is not the same as sex, nor does one have to inform the other, as this is only the case in cisgender bodies. Sexuality is what one finds erotic, pleasurable, or lack thereof in the body. This refers to how and with whom/what people experience these feelings. Race is a social and historical construct that is typically based on phenotypes. I label it as a construct, however, race can also be an important part of one's identity. Identity erasure is the tendency for an identity to be ignored, replaced, misrepresented, or underrepresented in a media source. These definitions are not absolute, but this is the type of framework that I will be using throughout my presentation. By looking at the historical foundations of LGBTQ visibility, I hope to explain identity politics and identify both past and modern themes of queer representation. Identity politics was created by the Combahee River Collective in 1977. The Combahee River Collective was a Black lesbian feminist group in the late 1970s. Identity politics was defined as a politicized approach to social issues that directly affect one's identities, specifically those identities that are oppressed by the existing societal systems of oppression in place. One of these existing systems places queer representation in a subordinate position to heterosexual representation in entertainment media. Furthermore, when representation exists, there's an idea of respectability politics that these representations must fit within a realm that does not make the ruling group uncomfortable. Respectability politics is the reason white, able-bodied gay men are often the face of the LGBTQ community. LGBTQ people have been seen on television and in films since the 1890s. Originally, homosexuality was only presented to ridicule overly feminine male characters and provide audience amusement. In the 1930s, there was a movement for the movie industry to enact self-censorship in an attempt to avoid government intervention. The Hays Code was adopted and banned explicitly gay characters in all films. This censorship only furthered the stereotypes of acting gay because they could not verbally identify a character as gay. By the 1960s, liberation movements had become very prominent throughout the United States. These movements caused new representations to focus on the violence and tragedy associated with the LGBTQ community in an attempt to render these movements useless. This trend was very popular for many decades and still influences some of the media today. In opposition to these negative portrayals, the 1990s became known as the decade for the rise of new queer cinema. This phenomena allowed more positive portrayals, but often kept the queer characters in the background to avoid too much backlash. In the 21st century, queer representation has increased, but negative or one-dimensional portrayals are still extremely common, especially those related to sexuality-based bullying or the white gay experience. These representations often rely on the idea of embodiment or the social normative forces that prioritize certain types of bodies as superior or natural set by those who are not oppressed by these standards and therefore hold hegemonic power. Hegemonic power has always been held by the non-queer community in a way that portrays the queer community as socially subordinate. Heterosexual and cisgender social domination has created an environment that allows limited and stereotypical queer representations. A large part of representation is being able to see characters like you in entertainment media. This concept proves that not only do people like you exist, but that they are worth creating. GLAAD Media says, "We know that what people watch on TV or read online shapes how they view and treat the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people around them. And we have a responsibility to make sure those media representations foster awareness, understanding, and respect." End quote. For GLAAD study, television refers to cable and broadcast TV like ABC, CBS, The CW, Fox, and NBC, cable scripted primetime programming, and originals from major streaming services like Amazon Prime, Hulu, and Netflix. I'm including these statistics to prove the inequitable representation on television with an intersectional lens. Intersectionality is the idea that all oppressions are connected, and that the compounding of these affected identities and systems of oppression and privilege create whole and complex experiences based on an individual's various backgrounds. Intersectionality is a tool that can be employed to avoid stereotypes and limits in entertainment media. However, it is often not used in diverse contexts. TV producers often do not acknowledge intersectionality by dealing with one ism at a time. GLAAD Media has been conducting entertainment media analysis for 15 years, and luckily the general trend for representation is upwards, with 2019 actually being the highest percentage of LGBTQ+ people on TV ever. However, there's often dissonance in this representation compared to the actual queer population. The chart on the left shows that on television, women are the most represented gender in the LGBTQ+ community, and gay men are the most represented sexuality. However, it's important to note that in the US, the queer community is actually estimated to be 58% women, and as the chart shows, 52% bisexual. This means that lesbians, gay men, and men in general are severely overrepresented, while women and bisexual men and women remain underrepresented in media. Compared to past years, the trend is skewing away from gay men, but they still remain the most represented sexuality. This is important because this means the majority of the LGBTQ+ population is not seeing as many characters like themselves in comparison to people in real life that share one or more of their identities. Concepts like bi erasure are fueled from these misrepresentations. This becomes more complicated when you consider gender and sexuality representation with race. Looking at race in the binary terms of white and people of color are actually overrepresented. However, this is a good thing because these communities are often seen as invisible and marginalized. Increased visibility for POC still does not match the majority white representation on TV. Within the queer POC community, Black people are often overrepresented, with communities like Latinx not receiving as much representation as they deserve. This is important because entertainment media has essentially assigned Black as the main people of color representation within the queer community, despite the existence of other races. It is important to represent all racial and ethnic identities to facilitate proper and correct media representation. Factors like colorism, class, and respectability politics also play into this representation. The American Disability Act defines disability to include those with apparent and non-apparent disabilities, including those with limited mobility, vision or hearing impairment, learning or mental health disabilities, cancer, PTSD, and HIV and AIDS, among others. Queer people with a disability are extremely underrepresented on television. 3.3% of LGBTQ+ people on television have a disability, when in reality 30% of men and 36% of women in the LGBT community are reported to have a disability. This lack of representation is due to hegemonic power often residing in those with able bodies. Furthermore, disability is often only represented in apparent situations, whereas non-apparent disabilities go underrepresented because of their lack of visibility in real life. This does not mean these disabilities do not exist, and each disability deserves representation. The film industry is even less representative in television shows in 2019. The films included are movies released from major studios. Films are less inclusive than TV, despite TV still falling short in representation in many categories. The film industry includes more men than women, even though the LGBTQ+ population is majority women. In addition, there are no transgender or non-binary representations in films compared to the already minimal 6.8% on queer TV. Following in television's footsteps, they also grossly overrepresent gay men and lesbians in comparison to the majority bisexual plus population. For race and ethnicity, white and Black representation mimic television's representation, but Latinx representation still falls short. Disability was not addressed in any of the films. GLAAD reports that the film industry always falls short in representation and that the representation given is extremely limited. Of the 45 LGBTQ characters counted in these films, 26 of them had less than 3 minutes of screen time, with 16 of those clocking in at under 1 minute of screen time. This means that LGBTQ+ visibility is not being given in adequate, dynamic, and representative forms in the film industry. After looking at the statistics, I want to explore the common queer tropes and stereotypes that are prevalent in entertainment media. LGBTQ+ visibility is positive. However, it is important to recognize that these representations should be accurate, positive, and inclusive. Rob Cover says, stereotypes find their persistence over time, not in the extent to which a culture might dispute them, but in the ease by which they are circulated and repeated, thereby reinforced even when disavowed. End quote. I also believe that queer characters deserve to be played by queer actors to maintain authenticity of the queer experience. GLAAD Media reported that 7 of the trans characters counted in their report were actually played by cisgender actors. This invalidates the struggles of the LGBTQ+ community in favor of non-queer normativity. I want to encourage entertainment media to move past these typical characters and to think of queer characters as dynamic people that deserve to be played by people that hold that identity. LGBTQ+ stereotypes are constructed in a binary-focused heteronormative environment. These normative ideas rely on the idea of binary categories like masculinity and femininity. The presence of queer characters is often constructed around what a cisgender heterosexual audience is comfortable with seeing on TV. The focus of these characters are often on their existence in a space rather than their relation to the space or their intimacy with others in that space. This lack of intimacy does not mirror the typical heterosexual characters or relationships portrayed in entertainment media. Stereotypes also feed into the idea of queerbaiting. Queerbaiting is hinting at the existence of LGBTQ+ relationships or identities in a piece of media without ever addressing it. This appeals to the queer audience but essentially teases them for wanting to share an identity with someone on TV. Shows like Teen Wolf and Riverdale are infamous for this tactic. The first stereotype I want to discuss is the closeted bully. These characters are first introduced as homophobic and typically very masculine or sporty. Later in the plot, it is revealed that they were actually hiding their true gay identity. On Glee, Dave constantly bullies Kurt, an out gay student, to the point where Kurt and his father are receiving death threat phone calls and Kurt is forced to transfer schools. The bullying is persistent even after Dave forcibly takes Kurt's first kiss because he is still hiding his identity. On Pretty Little Liars, Paige is introduced as the creepy and unblinking captain of the girls' swim team. When no one else is around, she harasses and threatens her teammate Emily, a recently out lesbian, with swim metaphors like being so into the breaststroke could end up hurting you, and an attempted drowning. The two eventually begin a relationship together. On Sex Education, Adam is known as Eric's bully. He steals Eric's food, lunch money, and homework at the threat of physical violence. When they both end up in detention together, Adam kisses Eric and begins to use Adam as his outlet for gay sexual desires. Each show features an out gay student being harassed by a closeted bully in a perceived position of power. This is problematic because it provides an excuse for homophobia. It allows the queer victim to blame themselves for being comfortable with their own identity and to not blame their bully because they are a secret gay. Another common stereotype is the gay best friend. This stereotype typically exists for white male characters in which their sexuality is apparent through their feminine and sometimes referred to as sissy actions. This femininity makes them more attractive to a typically cisgender straight female counterpart as best friend material. On Glee, Kurt is often seen as second best to Rachel, the star of the show. Rachel and eventually some of the other girls hang out with Kurt because he is gay and not because they liked him as a person. In the movie Gay Best Friend, Tanner is seen as the ultimate sidekick to ask for advice about fashion and boys after he comes out as gay. The whole plot of the movie is literally the most popular girls wanting for him to be their best friend because of his identity. In Mean Girls, Damien is a sassy best friend that rejects typical masculinity and is always seen around other girls. He keeps up with gossip with Janice, but does not develop his own plot despite being the gay best friend. Each media piece features a typically effeminate gay male that is placed in conjunction with a cisgender and heterosexual counterpart that values them for their femininity. This is problematic because it creates a one-sided portrayal of the gay experience and dehumanizes the queer character by making them into a commodity to be sold to non-queer people. The perfect straight man is a male character whose sexuality is the cause of conflict in the plot and disrupts their ability to be in a normal heterosexual relationship. They are often hyper-masculine to prove this normative role. On Will and Grace, Will is seen as the perfect counterpart to Grace, except for the fact that he is gay. This is exacerbated by Grace's trouble with finding men and Will's ability to connect with her. In Brokeback Mountain, Jack and Ennis are two perfectly normal masculine cowboys that escape from their wives and families to meet each other away from town. They're both seen as capable of being in heterosexual relationships if they did not give in to these homosexual desires. In Shameless, Ian and Mickey are both seen as independent people whose plot conflicts stem from their gay identity. For Ian, this is being threatened at his job after his boss's wife catches him and his boss having sex, and for Mickey, this interrupts his career as a thief due to his attraction to Ian. Each of these stories feature a hyper-masculine character whose story is interrupted by his sexuality, which limits his ability to be in a normal heterosexual relationship. This is problematic because it creates a harmful view of homosexuality as an interrupter of family life and as an identity that cannot be seen as normal or acceptable in a successful life. Many different types of people can be lesbians, but in entertainment media, they are usually portrayed as thin, tall, feminine women known as femmes in the queer community. The L word is important because it was the first show to focus on a majority queer cast and on lesbians in general, with some bisexual characters. But it features all femme characters. The Fosters is another inclusive TV show that has been known to show various queer life struggles, but Steph and Lena are casted to highlight the opposites in the relationship, with Steph being a cop and Lena being a school board member, among other diametric plot points. Despite this, Steph is a very soft masculine character and Lena remains very feminine. Both of them fit the typical feminine character. In American Horror Story, Lana is a female journalist who looks to draw the attention of many men in the show, despite her lesbian identity. Each of these portrayals of lesbians relies on a culturally attractive feminine female to be the face of this label in entertainment media. This is problematic because it caters toward the male gaze of craving femininity and the fetishization of female and female relationships. This also erases representation of other people that identify as lesbian but do not fit into this femme category, like butch or masculine lesbians. A common stereotype among queer women in media is the psycho lesbian. Their character is known for being mentally crazy in conjunction with their lesbian or bisexual identity. On Killing Eve, Villanelle is a bisexual psychopath that is overly seductive. She is also an assassin. On Orange is the New Black, Susanne and Maureen are both seen as inherently crazy, with Suzanne's nickname originally being Crazy Eyes. They both have trouble exploring their queer sexual desires because of this psycho lens. On Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Willow turns dark after the death of her girlfriend Tara. She is shown as a murderer that attempts to destroy the world. Each of these stories feature a woman-loving woman character whose psychotic storyline overlays their sexual identity. This is problematic because it creates a harmful view of homosexuality as something that corrupts normalcy and creates villains. Bisexual people face discrimination from those both inside and outside of the LGBTQ community because of the different visibly straight or visibly gay relationships that they can be in. A common stereotype that is stemmed from this is the idea that bisexuals are more likely to cheat. On Orange is the New Black, Piper cheats on her fiance Larry after she ends up in the same woman's prison as her ex-girlfriend Alex. This leads to the end of Piper and Larry's relationship. In Alex Strangelove, Alex is questioning being bisexual by making out with Elliot while he's still in a relationship with Claire. In Rent, Maureen is known for not being able to remain faithful to her partners. She is shown flirting with many people while still in a relationship. Each of these stories feature a bisexual character that plays into the idea that bisexual people are unfaithful and indecisive in committed relationships. This is problematic because it feeds into biphobia and it invalidates bi plus labels as overly sexual and untrustworthy people. Gender and humanity in general is often seen in binary terms. Therefore, when there's a non-binary portrayal in entertainment media, they are often portrayed as non-human. On The Good Place, Janet is a genderless artificial intelligence who begins to gain sentience. While they are often read as feminine presenting, they insist that they are not a girl. On Good Omens, the idea of pollution takes the form of a non-binary character. In one episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, the Genii are introduced as an androgynous species that does not allow binary gender. These shows feature non-binary characters that exist as technology or concepts rather than real genderless or non-binary human beings. This is problematic because it dehumanizes people that do not identify with the gender binary. Following the same idea as the non-human, non-binary representations, trans people are often represented as humans turned monsters due to their non-conformity to a gender binary. In Rocky Horror Picture Show, Dr. Frankenfurter is a self-proclaimed sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania that is attempting to create the perfect man for him to be able to play with. Rocky Horror was the first film to feature a gender non-conforming person as the main character. In Silence of the Lambs, Buffalo Bill murders women to use their skin as a feminine suit for himself. He believes himself to be transgender, but fails to qualify for gender confirmation surgery due to his mental illness. In Antiviral, Sid injects his body with a virus from a celebrity named Hannah in a world where this is common practice. He is portrayed as wanting to be like Hannah, and the virus makes his body more feminine and more like hers at various times, in addition to becoming horrifying and disgusting as the virus starts to kill him. Each of these movies feature a trans character that is taking parts of cisgender people to create a better experience for themselves. This is problematic because it fuels the idea that trans existence takes away from cisgender existence. This stereotype poses transness as a threat rather than a self-identity. These characters' queer identities are revealed when the plot point is reached that they are in love with their often straight best friend. On Orange is the New Black, Pusey cuddles and attempts to kiss her best friend Tasty while they bond in prison. Tasty tells Pusey she doesn't feel that way and they are just best friends. Pusey accepts this but is still portrayed as a naive lesbian hopelessly in love with her best friend. In The Perks of Being a Wallflower, Patrick faces many challenges with being one of the openly gay people in town, while the person he hooks up with remains closeted and homophobic in public. Patrick eventually manifests his frustration with an unsatisfying relationship by impulsively kissing his best friend Charlie. In It Chapter 2 is revealed that Richie is a closeted gay man that was secretly in love with his best friend Eddie throughout their childhood. These portrayals each place the queer character in a situation where their own sexuality has the potential to compromise their friendships. This is problematic because it sees gay people as hiding their own identity and being predatory to their friends. This informs the myth that people can never be just friends if they are gay. These characters were given LGBTQ+ identities when they were originally created, but were straightwashed in their mainstream media debuts. Jughead Jones was originally portrayed as asexual in the Archie comics, but his identity was ignored in the adaptation of Riverdale to thicken sexual and romantic plotlines. In the Marvel comics, Loki is a bisexual and gender-fluid person because of his shape-shifting abilities. This has been ignored in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to date. For Harry Potter's Dumbledore, his sexuality is not discussed in either the books or the movies, but the author J.K. Rowling has confirmed he is gay. This type of representation is problematic because it erases and ignores the experiences of LGBTQ+ individuals in favor of cisgender and heterosexual storylines. These characters establish a relationship between queerness and suicidality. While suicidal ideation is a prominent issue in the LGBTQ+ community, this common media phenomenon takes advantage of the idea to bury your gaze by including limited visibility of a queer character and simply killing them to move on with the show. These storylines are so depressing and common that they have come to be known as gangst. In The Miseducation of Cameron Post, Mark is forced to go to gay conversion therapy with many other queer teenagers. After completing this therapy and stopping his homosexual thoughts, Mark's dad still doesn't allow him to return home because he still considers Mark to be too effeminate. Mark attempts suicide through genital mutilation after having a mental breakdown from the news. On The Vampire Diaries, Mary Louise and Nora kill themselves in a car crash while escaping a vampire hunter. Mary decided to die with her lover rather than spending the rest of her life running and possibly separated. On House of Cards, Michael is a fictional LGBT rights activist in Russia that hangs himself in protest of being arrested for his activism. This stereotype is problematic because it does not allow for queer happy endings. This trope portrays the message that being gay ends in tragedy, harm, or suicide. This can exacerbate feelings of hopelessness and isolation in queer viewers. This trope diverges a bit from live representation, but it is important to recognize because it represents the dangers that people try to prove in queer media. These characters have started many controversies because they are assumed to be gay by certain religious groups. None of these characters are canonically gay, but the claims went so far for Bert and Ernie that Sesame Workshop had to make an announcement that Bert and Ernie have no sexual orientations because they are both puppets. These are examples of homophobic groups attempting to prove that the gay agenda is being pushed on America's youth. This is problematic because it capitalizes on the idea that queer people everywhere are trying to influence children into supposed sin. An important aspect of intersectional representation is queer interracial couples. While queer relationships typically portray accurate representations of relationship conflicts and triumphs, there are many stereotypes within the couple, including assumed safe spaces with familial and occupational support post coming out, neglecting the confrontation between the intersecting of oppressions of sexuality, gender, and race, and the use of interracial as meaning one white person and one non-white person. The white member typically has blonde hair, blue eyes, and is conventionally thin. They also hold a more powerful position than their POC counterpart. The non-white member of the relationship is also subject to more sexualization, such as Callie and Santana both being seen as sexually promiscuous because of the existing Latinx lesbian fetish. This is problematic because media suggests there's only one way to do interracial couples, and that means involving a white person. There are many shows that are working to break these stereotypes, including Orange is the New Black, that features a cast inclusive in race, age, gender expression, sexuality, and class. They are also one of the first shows to cast an actual trans person as a trans character, with Laverne Cox as Sophia Bursette. The Bold Type features Kat and Adina as one of the only interracial lesbian couples with two people of color. They also address the experience of being a queer Muslim through Adina. Asia Kate Dillon is the first non-binary actor with a starring role in American TV, in Billions, which features Taylor Mason as CEO of the company and one of the most powerful and visible non-binary characters of all time. Brooklyn Nine-Nine features queer POC characters in positions of power. Captain Holt is out and visibly gay from the beginning of the series. He is captain of the police station and is shown in romantic scenarios with his husband. He discusses the challenges he faced being openly gay as a member of the NYPD in the 80s. One of Holt's detectives is Latinx bisexual badass Rosa. She is played by a bisexual woman, and her bisexuality does not focus on it being just a phase. Station 19 shows LGBTQ+ people in positions of power. They break traditional feminine and masculine stereotypes and work to recognize homophobia in the workplace. Also, the new adaptation of Batwoman features the first lesbian superhero title character. Examples of good intersectional individuals combine many aspects of identity, including gender, race, sexuality, education, ability, class, and other identities that can be oppressed in social systems of control. The takeaway from these characters is that people can be queer and something else, foundational to their identity. Stereotypes are not always bad representations. They can have positive influences, but the whole point of intersectionality is that people have many different backgrounds that can be oppressed, and these oppressions layer and compound on each other to create unique experiences. These unique experiences can be and should be portrayed in the media. The main point that I want to argue with visibility and representation is that entertainment media has an effect on LGBTQ+ lives on individual and social levels. LGBTQ+ people are more susceptible to suicide than their cisgender and heterosexual peers. This is because queer people are more likely to be exposed to general risk factors for suicide, like mental illness, feelings of hopelessness, and lack of family support, in addition to factors specific to the queer community, like identity discomfort and victimization. This exposure and vulnerability comes from the general discrimination, invalidation, and physical harm that LGBTQ youth experience due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. They are also less likely to be able to access factors that protect individuals from suicidal ideation, like positive family relationships, social belonging at school, work, and in other social contexts, and general validation of existence and identity. This validation can come from media representations. Media representation influences identity formation and acceptance. Negative representation increases internalized negativity and creates self-hatred through this cognitive dissonance of your sexual identity. But by seeing someone portrayed positively on TV with an identity that you share, your own self-perception is affected. Positive representation fosters resilience from suicidal and mental health risk factors and builds a positive self-image that is inclusive of your identities. One case study that I would like to highlight in relation to media's effect on LGBTQ+ politics is state laws and conversion therapy. As of 2017, only 10 states had laws in place to ban or limit conversion therapy practices. 5 new states passed laws in 2018, 6 new states passed laws in 2019, and 2 new states passed laws in 2020, bringing the total number to 23. All the dark green states total to over double the 2017 number of statewide conversion therapy protections. The release of The Miseducation of Cameron Post in 2018, Boy Erased in 2018, and Trapped, the Alex Cooper story in 2019 coincided with these new legal protections and actually had an impact on these new laws being passed by accurately visualizing the negative consequences of gay conversion therapy, like the emotional abuse queer children are subjected to, and how this manifests in desires to escape and self-harm tendency. Increased positive media representation of the LGBTQ+ community allows for increased social support as queer identities are recognized as valid. Increased social support can be seen through political actions such as same-sex marriage legalization. This increase in support is often mirrored in familial and peer environments in which there is more personal acceptance of queer identities. This acceptance helps create more positive home lives and improves the self-image of queer individuals. Improved self-perception leaves queer individuals less susceptible to suicidal risk factors and allows for fulfilling lives to be experienced by those that hold an LGBTQ+ identity. In fact, there have been studies that show there is a direct correlation between the legalization of same-sex marriage and a decline in LGBTQ+ suicide attempts because of the decrease in feelings of hopelessness due to a more accepting environment, in addition to the case study on gay conversion therapy. Media has an impact. Positive queer representation fosters positive queer communities and more accepting environments. Essentially, visibility matters.